The shooting of Trayvon Martin, a trip to the 7-Eleven on a rainy Sunday night in February in Sanford, Florida, results in the nation's next big trial. The shooter, George Zimmerman, claims self-defense, but prosecutors say murder. Each side has their own story to tell to the jury. Which one will be believed? Ryan Smith is off tonight, so Darren Kavanoki is with our in-studio jury here at HLN headquarters in Atlanta. Which story will they find believable? HLN legal correspondent Gene Casares is in front of the courthouse in Sanford, Florida, where all of this is taking place. Meanwhile, the man who represented O.J. Simpson and Charlie Sheen, Yale Galanter, is in Miami tonight, along with the man who will help us understand Florida law, the Honorable Alex Ferrer, a.k.a. TV's Judge Alex. We've also got our own experts here in studio, criminal defense attorneys Esther Panich and Kirby Clements. Tonight, we begin with the case that is the next big trial, the case that could divide a nation.
Hey, we've had some break-ins in my neighborhood, and there's a real suspicious guy.
He just said he shot him. Yes, the person is dead, laying on the grass.
The Sanford Police Department is conducting a fair investigation.
There's gunshots. Our son was not committing any crime.
No!
No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace.
Are you following him? Yeah. Okay, we don't need you to do that.
Mr. Zimmerman has made the statement of self-defense.
But Neighborhood Watch is Neighborhood Watch, not Neighborhood Shoot.
$1 million for the capture of George Zimmerman.
You know, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon.
So you think he's yelling help?
Yes.
George, what's your last name? Zimmerman.
Today, we filed an information charging George Zimmerman with murder in the second degree. Mr. Zimmerman is indeed in custody.
We just wanted an arrest, and we got it.
Mr. Zimmerman?
Yes, sir.
You're appearing here for charge of murder in the second degree.
George was a caring, he had a passion for the safety of our neighborhood.
I felt sorry that they lost their child.
George has been telling the truth the whole time. We are confident that will happen, that the truth will come out.
So passion's running high as we learn about this case. Who here has a strong opinion? Anybody? Juror number 12, let's hear about it.
I think it's going to be a very interesting case because I think it will boil down to whose voice is on that 911 call.
Right.
And after hearing Trayvon's mother interviewed saying that she knows her boy's voice, that's already resonating in my mind.
So you're interested in hearing about who's saying what on that infamous 911 call?
Whose voice is it?
Whose voice is it?
Crying for help.
Got it. Got it. Who else has a strong opinion? I think juror number 5. Now, by the way, don't shoot this in a way that makes me look bald, if we can all agree on that. What's that about?
You know, I am having a hard time getting past the fact that Zimmerman approached Trayvon Martin, and not only approached him, followed him after being told not to by the 911 operator.
Right.
At that point, self-defense is not even in my mind because he pursued him.
Right, even after the 911 operator said, hey, you can back off, we got it from here. Correct. All right, and juror number 6, we're coming back to you. Vinny, opinions are running strong here in our jury box.
This is the next big one. I mean, everyone knows the story and everyone's got an idea about the story, but we are getting close to jury selection. I want to go outside the courthouse to our own Gene Casares. Gene, what is the vibe down there in Sanford, Florida, as we get close to jury selection in the case of Florida versus George Zimmerman?
You know, Vinny, I think the vibe here is that this is a community that cares about this case. 500 potential jurors have received summons in the mail, will come to the courthouse for voir dire, the selection of the jury. And I think this community knows that there are two sides to this case, two distinct sides. And there are passions and opinions on both.
All right. And you know, when you say that, Gene, and I'm thinking about this, it's a little different than a lot different than the Jodi Arias case. The Jodi Arias case, the opinions were overwhelming one way. Here, I'm hearing opinions on both sides, a little more divisive. The type of trial is different. So I want to hear from my experts tonight. I want you to give me one word, just one word, to describe this trial. Esther Panich, I begin with you.
Entrenched. Each side is digging in.
Kirby Clements.
I'm going to say explosive, because this is going to, this brings racial issues into the matter, into the mix. You have a young black man killed by a white or a Spanish man, but nonetheless, there's a racial component. This is explosive.
Judge Alex, one word to describe this trial.
You used my word, Vinny. Divisive.
Divisive. Yale Galanter, one word.
Yeah, Judge Alex took my word. I was going to say divisive. This is the type of trial, Vinny, that will absolutely split a community and has the potential to split the nation.
Gene Casares, one word to describe this trial.
Educational.
Fantastic. Darren Kavanoki, the king of one word.
Well, I'll tell you, Vinny, my one-word combos are now known as combinokis in the Twitter sphere, but I say polarizational, polarizing and sensational.
And we've got a lot to talk about. We've got our jury here, and I'm really wondering, whose story are they going to believe tonight? The prosecution's story or George Zimmerman's story? We're going to show them the evidence.
Walking like in the grassy area, like up towards, kind of between these two poles, and like I said, it was rainy, and he was just leisurely looking at the house. I passed him, and he kept staring at me. I actually walked all the way to the street. Right back there, they said, "Are you following him?" And I said, "Yes," because I was, in the area. And he said, "We don't need you to do that."
At that point, you went for your phone? Yes, sir. And they punched you in the face? I answered him. I said, no, I don't have a problem. Okay. And that's when I went for my phone and he punched me in the face. And then you guys exchanged some punches? I didn't hit him at all. I mean, I was trying to defend myself, but every time he punched me in the nose, it felt like my head was going to explode. Okay. Was it at that time you pulled out your gun? No.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the HLNTV.com evidence room. I want to show you some of the evidence here, and we'll break it down in two ways. Right now, we're focusing on George Zimmerman's story, and he has told the story more than once in several interviews, including returning to the scene with a video camera with police the day after he shot and killed Trayvon Martin. Let's take a listen to George Zimmerman in his own words.
Walking like in the grassy area, like up towards, kind of between these two poles, and like I said, it was rainy, and he was just leisurely looking at the house. I passed him, and he kept staring at me. I drove past him, okay, and I went to the clubhouse. Then he walked past me, and he kept looking at my car, and still looking around at the houses and stuff. And I saw him walking back that way and then cut through the back of the houses. He looked back and he noticed me and he cut back through the houses. I was still on the phone with non-emergency. And then he came back and he started walking up towards the grass and then came down and circled my car. And I told the operator that. And then I thought to get out and look for a street sign. I looked around and I didn't see anybody. And I told non-emergency, I said, you know what, he's gone. He's not even here. I actually walked all the way to the street. Right back there, they said, are you following him? And I said, yes, because I was, in the area. And he said, we don't need you to do that. But he was about where you were. And I said, no, I don't have a problem. And I went to go grab my cell phone, but I left it in a different pocket. And I looked down in my pant pocket, and he said, you got a problem now. And then he was here, and he punched me in the face. I stumbled, and I fell down, he pushed me down, somehow he got on top of me. That's when I started screaming for help. I started screaming, help, help, as loud as I could. I tried to sit up, and that's when he grabbed me by the head, and he tried to slam my head down. He put his hand on his nose, on my nose, and his other hand on my mouth. He said, shut up. I tried to squirm off the concrete. Somebody here opened the door, and I said, help me, help me. And they said, I'll call 911. I said, no, help me. That's when my jacket moved up, and I had my firearm on my right side hip. My jacket moved up, and he saw it. I feel like he saw it. He looked at it, and he said, you're gonna die tonight. And he reached for it, but he reached, like I felt his arm going down to my side, and I grabbed it, and I just grabbed my firearm, and I shot him.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to walk you through the map of the neighborhood where all this happened, because I think it's very significant. It's a good way to get your bearings as to what's happening. George Zimmerman on that night is driving from his home down this street. He says he's going to Target, and he gets right to this area, and this is where he says he sees Trayvon Martin on a yard, on a lawn right in front of Frank Taffy's house. He slows down, looks at him, and then says he continues past him, drives all the way down to the clubhouse, parks in the clubhouse, and he says that's when he called police initially. So now Trayvon Martin, he says, walks down, walks past him, is looking at him, and then continues this way. He hangs out by the mailboxes, then continues this way. At that point, George Zimmerman then continues in his car, and he says he parks right about here and sees Trayvon Martin disappear through here, and then he says he doubles back and then circles around his car and then disappears again. At that point, George Zimmerman says he now goes up here looking for an address and goes all the way up here, still on the phone with police, then hangs up with police, and then says he's on his way back to his car when he says Trayvon Martin comes out and jumps him right in this area, and that's where the confrontation takes place. So, ladies and gentlemen, jury, that's George Zimmerman's story and trying to lay it out for you on the map as it all went down, Darren.
Well, let's go to the jurors now. Juror number 2, you had a question, but by the way, we've already convicted you of being guilty of being the best-dressed juror here. We had a little conference in your absence. So what's your question for Vinny or the panel?
Well, my question is for the panel. We've seen that the judge has disallowed a lot of the background information on Trayvon, but yet and still the defense has put that out there in the atmosphere, potentially tainting jurors. Do you think that's an effective strategy? And if so, how does the prosecution, I guess, make sure they filter out those kind of jurors?
Yeah, what about the role of the court of public opinion here?
The defense has an obligation to turn over reciprocal discovery. Just like the state has an obligation to turn it over to the defense also has an obligation to turn over some of the discovery that they're going to use for the state. So when they do that, it becomes public. In Florida, it becomes public, so everyone can see it. So they had an obligation to do it, and they did it. And it does have an effect, because what it does is evens the playing field. You had the prosecutor, Angela Corey, coming out in press conferences and putting out all her discovery saying, wow, what a bad guy George Zimmerman is. So now what the defense did was really even the playing field to try to make it, look, they're both human, they both have faults, and just to make it a more even playing field.
And I think the defense was right to do that to some degree, but the other thing you have to factor in is that it wasn't that Trayvon was a gangbanger or had anything really horrible about him. So you almost seem as though you're trying to suggest that he deserved to get shot because he had used.
And that's the fine line that they all have to walk. We've got a lot to talk about. Again, George Zimmerman on trial, jury selection just around the corner. We're going through Zimmerman's story right now.
The attacks continued. Don't listen to him, he's George's brother. Don't listen to him, he's making things up. Later and most viciously of all, don't listen to a thing Zimmerman Jr. says, he's gay. I came out to my family in the era of rampant bullying. George was the first one to come to my new home, the first to embrace me, the first to assure me everything would be right again.
All right, George Zimmerman claiming self-defense, claiming he was attacked by Trayvon Martin. We got some pictures of him from the night of the shooting after he was cleaned up by EMTs. Here's a full body shot. You can see him. Here's a close-up of his face. And if you look here, you can see some damage to his nose. His nose was broken, apparently, by Trayvon Martin. Here you see the back of his head. Looks like he's got 2 areas where he got a cut here and here, and you can see some of the bleeding around that as well. He said his head was bashed into the sidewalk. Here's a picture a little more close up with some more blood. And again, you can see it looks like the focal point of it is right about there. And then you take a look at George Zimmerman's hands, however, but there's no injuries apparent on his hands anywhere. So Darren Kavanoki, part of the evidence of self-defense is that he got into a fight, he was attacked, that he had injuries.
Well, let's get those paddles ready, all right? Yes or no? Is George Zimmerman's story believable? Let's raise them high. And I see some yeses and some nos. Let's start with the yes down here. I feel like Phil Donahue. I get to run around with this. Juror number 6, you vote yes. Tell us why.
Yes, it's a yes with a lot of questions because it's possible it could have happened. Just not sure if it actually did happen.
So maybe believable, but we've got to hear some evidence first. Exactly. All right. And juror number 4, you say no.
I say no, and that's a hesitant no. But, you know, we're looking at a guy over 4 years who called the non-emergency line 44 times to complain about things like dogs in the road, kids playing in the road, suspicious people. There were 12 phone calls about suspicious people in 4 years.
So you think George Zimmerman may have a hair trigger complaining, and that may taint that. Let's go to juror number 10. You're also saying no. Tell me about that.
I don't believe it because I used to work at 911, and people, they follow people all the time. They have a tendency to want to be the hero. And we always tell them, you know, don't approach people for their own safety. And I'm all for protecting your neighborhood, but if it's self-defense, I don't think you would have followed him.
Interesting. Vinny, we got a strong mix of opinions. That could be a recipe for a hung jury. We'll have to wait and see how this plays out.
All right, we're just coming off a hung jury on one thing, Darren. Slow down a little bit. Judge Alex, you talk about a believable story. Do you find the story that George Zimmerman has put out there, you know, 4 different interviews or so, believable?
Well, it's certainly plausible. I don't think that you can exclude it and say it didn't happen that way. The inconsistencies in any of the statements he gave, which anytime anybody recites their version or their story, there are going to be little inconsistencies. Those are going to be the key points. The jury's going to focus on that, and they're going to have to determine whether the inconsistencies are the natural inconsistencies that people have when they don't have a staged story, or whether the inconsistencies indicate a story that was made up, and that we'll have to wait and see.
Yale Galanter, let me get your take on this one. Is this something that you think you could sell to a jury?
Oh, yeah, Vinny. And the law in Florida favors Zimmerman. I mean, the state has to prove that it wasn't self-defense. The self-defense instruction is going to say to these jurors, listen, if you have any doubt as to whether or not this was self-defense, you have to find for the defendant. So the state of Florida actually has to come in and not only get the inconsistencies and prove that Zimmerman's lying, but also prove that it didn't occur the way Zimmerman says it occurred. And that is a high burden in a self-defense case here in the state of Florida. That's the biggest problem that the state of Florida has, is they've got to prove...
Kirby's shaking his head, Yale. Kirby's shaking his head.
Well, I got to tell you, the problem with his story that I'm having right now is, how did he get access to his gun? If Trayvon is straddling him in the version he gave, it would appear to me that Trayvon's legs would have been between his face, Zimmerman's face, and the gun. So it doesn't make sense that there was a struggle and the gun just popped out, he grabbed it and shot him. That part, I can't...
The physical evidence here is going to tell a lot, and the forensics as well. Important in this case, much more after dark. We got to hear, what's the prosecution version of what happened? That's next.
Who was Trayvon Martin?
My heart hurts for my son.
Trayvon was a people's person. Yeah. He didn't deserve to die.
Played football all his life, and just one day, he just said he doesn't want to play football. He wants to be a pilot.
Martin's parents enrolled him in Experience Aviation in 2009, a summer program that teaches kids all things aviation.
I said, what are you doing in aviation school? And he was like, oh, I want to fly planes. I said, no black people want to fly planes. And he goes, I'll be the first one.
According to a report by the Miami Herald, Trayvon was suspended from this school 3 times.
He was a regular teenager. You know, teenagers try best they can to fit in. They try to impress their friends by talking tough.
He's very used to fighting, that he has used some drugs in the past.
3 months before he encountered George Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin sends text messages about a fight, saying his opponent didn't bleed enough, only his nose.
Whatever he had dealings with school, it was not criminal. It was not violent. He's never been arrested.
A shot to the heart, ending the life of Trayvon Martin.
Welcome back to the HLNTV.com evidence room. Right now, we went through George Zimmerman's story. I want to take you through, ladies and gentlemen, the prosecution theory of this case. And it all begins here at the 7-Eleven, and there's video of this, of Trayvon Martin at the 7-Eleven purchasing the iced tea and the Skittles that he was getting to watch the NBA All-Star game on that rainy Sunday night. Now what I want to do is walk you through where Trayvon Martin was going, his path that night, because it's interesting. On this map, the 7-Eleven is off the map here, so he's going this way. And he's on the phone with his girlfriend, and that's how we kind of know what he was doing. And she explained that as he was going home, it was raining, so he tried to take a shortcut through a neighboring complex to take a shortcut and cut through the community, because the community where he was staying was gated, and there was a fence all the way around most of the community, but there was no fence here. And this is the area where George Zimmerman was driving down and met Trayvon Martin. And what prosecutors are really going to focus on a lot is the phone call made by George Zimmerman himself to police non-emergency. Take a listen, and it's a prosecution theory that George Zimmerman was profiling Trayvon Martin.
Hey, we've had some break-ins in my neighborhood, and there's a real suspicious guy. The best address I can give you. This guy looks like he's up to no good, or he's on drugs or something. It's raining, and he's just walking around looking about.
Okay, and this guy, is he white, black, or Hispanic?
He looks black.
Did you see what he was wearing?
Yeah, a dark hoodie, like a gray hoodie, and either jeans or sweatpants and white tennis shoes. He's here now. He was just staring.
Okay, it says on the left-hand side from the clubhouse?
No, you go in straight through the entrance, and then you make a left. Yeah, you go straight in, don't turn and make a left. He's running.
He's running? Which way is he running?
Down towards the other entrance of the neighborhood.
Okay, which entrance is that he's heading towards?
The back entrance.
Are you following him?
Yeah.
Okay, we don't need you to do that.
And the prosecution theory will focus on what they believe happened here. George Zimmerman profiling Trayvon Martin as someone who was up to no good in the neighborhood, someone who was breaking in. What they'll also point out is what Trayvon Martin was actually found with at the scene. No burglar's tools, no weapons, just the iced tea, the Skittles, a photograph, a lighter, some earbuds, and some money that his father gave him. The bottom line is prosecutors will argue that Trayvon Martin was followed, was chased, and ultimately confronted by George Zimmerman. Darren, if the jurors have any questions, feel free to answer.
Yeah, I'm sure they do. You know, as I listen to that, Vinny, and I hear that 911 operator say, "Are you following him?" We don't need you to do that. That just leaped out at me. Who else has some comments here? Juror number 8, you had mentioned something earlier.
Yeah, my question is definitely for the panel. It seems that the prosecution will try to make a play on the fact that George Zimmerman was told to stand down. How do you think the defense will combat that?
So what do you think, defense experts?
The defense would say, well, the 911 operator is not law enforcement and could not give George Zimmerman an order, and he's also not the person on the ground in the scene, so George Zimmerman was doing what he thought he could to protect his community. That's how the defense could attack that.
Juror number 11, I think you said you had a question. Is that right?
I do. I wanted to know if Florida plans to do away with or revise the Stand Your Ground law.
You know, that's a great question for Judge Alex or Yale Gallant or either one of our Miami guys tonight.
Yeah, Vinny, I don't know of anything. Go ahead, Judge Alex.
I was going to say, I can tell you that their efforts were made last year in the heat of the moment when this case was getting all this publicity to push a bill through the legislature to revoke the Stand Your Ground law. Personally, I think it's a bad law. It's probably well-intentioned to say citizens should be able to stand up to criminals, but it's been used more by criminals. I'm not referring to this particular case. We'll see how that pans out, than it has by legitimate law-abiding citizens. It died in the legislature, and it was not passed, so the law does not look like it's going to be changed anytime soon from what I can see.
Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with Judge Alex. There was this movement when this came to kind of do away with the law and retract it. There's nothing currently pending to do away with the law. I think Stand Your Ground is here to stay in Florida.
All right, I haven't shown you all the evidence that the prosecution has. They have a star witness, and that's next.
It's important to remember that Trayvon was a minor. He had just turned 17 years old. He was just a kid, up against a grown adult.
Not only did I lose a son, I lost a dear friend. He'll be sadly missed. And I made a promise that I won't stop.
He was about there, but he was walking towards me. And he said, "You got a problem now." And then he was here, and he punched me in the face. That's when my jacket moved up, and I had my firearm on my right side hip. My jacket moved up, and he saw it. I feel like he saw it. He looked at it, and he said, "You're gonna die tonight." And he reached for it, but he reached, like, I felt his arm going down to my side, and I grabbed it, and I just grabbed my firearm, and I shot him.
Trayvon Martin is not alive to tell his story, but his girlfriend may be able to come close because she was on the phone with Trayvon that night. His girlfriend, witness number 8, could be the prosecution's star witness. Here's a clip from her interview with prosecutors.
Trayvon tells you the guy's getting closer to him. And then you hear Trayvon saying something.
Yeah.
Right? And what do you hear Trayvon saying?
Why you following me for?
Why are you following me for?
Yeah.
And then what happened?
I hear this man, like an old man,
Okay.
say, "What are you doing around here?"
Okay. So you definitely could tell another voice that was not Trayvon.
Yeah.
And you heard this other voice say what?
Yeah. What are you doing around here?
What are you doing around here? Okay. Okay. And then what happened?
And then I was still screaming. I was saying, "Trayvon, Trayvon."
And there was no response?
Yeah. And then next thing the phone just shut off.
The phone shut off?
It just shut
Okay.
off.
Okay. Did you hear any kind of screamings like "help me" or anything like that?
No.
Okay. Did you hear any kind of shot?
No.
Okay. When the phone shut off, did you try calling back?
I called him back like 3
Okay.
or 2 times.
Did you ever get any response?
No, and text him.
Now, there was no eyewitness to that moment of confrontation between George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin. Who started it? George Zimmerman has one version. This is as close as the prosecution's going to have, Darren, because she's not an eyewitness, but perhaps an ear witness to that moment of confrontation.
Well, let's check in and see how they're doing. Panel, get your voting paddles ready. Is the prosecution's case believable? Yes or no? Are you believing the prosecution? Yeses, yeses, yeses all the way around. Juror number 7, let me jump in. Now is my Phil Donahue moment.
I was going to ask you about your socks, but
oh yeah, well today's socks are brought to you by Dr. Seuss. So, what do you say, juror number 7?
Well, I believe what George said. I believe that would happen because he couldn't tell. It was dark and somebody's approaching him. I believe what he said.
It's amazing that we have unanimity here among our panel. Let me jump down into the front row. And juror number 1, you've been oddly silent so far tonight.
I believe, yes, but is what I say, because I keep thinking
we don't have yes, but on the panel.
We don't.
I mean, on the panel, but
we
go
don't.
on.
But I keep thinking if, but not for Zimmerman following the victim, none of this would have happened. And I can't help but think this kid in the dark of the night with Skittles and iced tea is just thinking, dude, why are you following me? He got scared. He got skittish. And I think it just went downhill from there.
So you believe Zimmerman, but you still believe that he may be at fault and the instigator in this. Vinny, there's a lot to sort out here.
There really is. But the one moment where I saw a lot of jurors nodding their heads, Yale Galanter, I want to ask you about this. Everyone in our jury, not everyone, but almost everyone was nodding their heads that George Zimmerman, they believe George Zimmerman was following Trayvon Martin. How does that issue now play? I mean, because now it seems that the defense has to overcome something to a certain extent.
Well, there are 2 issues. First is the credibility of witness number 8. She's given a number of statements. I'm sure the defense team is going to just absolutely hammer her on all the inconsistencies. The second thing is, under Florida law, even if somebody is the aggressor and someone's coming towards the aggressor with more force, and it switches and that person becomes in fear of their life, they can use deadly force that becomes justified. So it really is a balance of what the state of Florida is going to be able to prove, because they have the burden of proving that Zimmerman's theory of the case is not what occurred. And that's really the biggest hurdle that the government has here, is they've got to overcome that.
Yeah, I almost hear Yale Galanter saying even if George Zimmerman followed him and started the confrontation, that if George Zimmerman's losing, he's entitled to shoot Trayvon Martin. And that's interesting. I want to talk more about that. All right, time to reveal what's under tonight's mystery box. Take a look, folks. And there it is. It's a scale. We're not talking about the scales of justice here. In this case, we're talking about how much the scale has fluctuated with George Zimmerman's weight. Let's take a look at Zimmerman at the start of the case compared to now. What a huge difference. Now, his attorneys said that he has actually gained over 100 pounds. How will the jury view this weight gain? Does it make him look more like a murderer or more like someone who would need to use deadly force to fight off a 17-year-old? Darren, I wonder what the jury thinks about this huge difference in weight for George Zimmerman at trial. His appearance totally different.
Well, we'll get to them in a second. I'll volunteer, though, to give him a total makeover, including physical training, Vinny. I just want you to know I'm willing to step up. There's lots of comments, though. I know juror number 3, you had something to say or a question for the panel.
I do have a question. We know that the defense had a pretrial hearing on stand your ground. We know he also decided not to go with that at that time. Can that come in later into the trial, and how would it impact it if it did?
Now, see, I think that they can raise that in front of the judge, and that the benefit strategically for the defense was that they didn't risk losing that stand your ground argument in front of the judge, and in that way a jury would never buy it because everyone would know about it. So I think the defense made a good.
He's only got to testify once. He doesn't have to get up there twice. Yale Galanter, do you agree?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they didn't want to commit George to sworn testimony that early, and that's why they gave up the right to do the stand their ground.
So flexibility here. Juror number 2, you had something.
Sure. There's been a lot of talk in the Jodi Arias trial, for example, about the charges that were levied against her. What is your feeling about the charges against Zimmerman? Did they overcharge, undercharge, and why do you believe that's the case?
Esther's shaking her head already.
I think it's an overcharge. I think that if they had charged a manslaughter, which is more of a reckless standard, that they would probably be successful as well. I think murder is a little, second-degree murder is a little further, is a little too high for what this situation warrants.
Hey, Darren, let's see what Judge Alex has to say about that as well. Judge?
I totally agree. I think that it was an overcharge. You know, obviously, when somebody dies, especially a young male, you want to charge the highest possible, but prosecution's going to have a hard time showing the ill will, hatred, spite, and evil intent that Florida law requires. Based on what I've seen reported that they have as far as evidence, I think it's going to be a tough road for them to hoe.
Okay, passions and opinions running strong here in the jury box. Juror number 10, what do you have on this?
I just want to go back to what we were discussing before. The Florida law, from what I'm understanding, what they're saying, if I'm walking in my neighborhood and someone approaches me and I turn around and say, hey, why are you, approaching me, and they feel like they're being attacked, they can kill me?
Well, this is an interesting one, Yale, because you brought this up, and let me throw it to the judge. Judge, if in fact, let's presume, and again we're presuming that George Zimmerman starts the confrontation, he's the one who physically assaults Trayvon Martin, but in the course of this fight then, Trayvon Martin gets the upper hand and is winning the fight. Can George Zimmerman then avail himself to deadly force and self-defense because he's losing a fight that he started?
Well, that's a very difficult scenario to parse out. The law says that an individual, even if he's the aggressor, if he makes a clear and unequivocal indication that he is trying to avoid the conflict, for example, he backs out, he tries to back away, he tries to leave, and is then pursued by the one who would have been the victim, and is assaulted by the victim, and is in fear for his own death and serious bodily injury, yes, he can use deadly force and can claim self-defense. What's more likely is the scenario, because we don't have Trayvon's version, what's more likely is this. If you leave your house and you see somebody you think is breaking into your neighbor's house and you follow him, you do not become an aggressor simply because you follow somebody who you think is committing a crime. You're just somebody who thinks, I'm following somebody until the police get here. What's critical is what happened at the moment of confrontation when the two of them came together. And what the prosecution and the defense are going to have to work with is George Zimmerman's version, because unfortunately Trayvon is not here to give us his version. That's what makes the state's case so hard.
All right, this is not an easy one for either side, prosecution or defense. We're going to break it down. HLN After Dark. Welcome back to HLN After Dark. Tonight, it's the George Zimmerman trial. And what we did with our in-studio juries, we kind of gave a preview of each side's case. George Zimmerman's version of what happened and the prosecution's version of what happened. And we asked our in-studio jury, is story A believable? Is story B believable? Take a look up on the screen, ladies and gentlemen. Take a look on the screen, because we've got a freeze frame of you guys with your votes. And the top one is the vote for George Zimmerman's story being believable. The bottom one is the prosecution theory. And I noticed jurors, Darren, 1, 6, 7, and 9 both find both stories potentially believable.
Yeah, and
Can you do a little follow-up with 1, 6, 7, and 9?
I will. And by the way, I know we don't have much of an appetite for hung juries right now, but when we've got people finding both stories believable, that's a recipe for a hung jury. I'm going to start up here with number 7. Let him have it.
Okay, according to George's testimony, Trayvon assaulted first. Okay, now in the dark, you can't tell if he's 16 or he's 18 or he's 22. With a hoodie and it's raining out, he's got every reason to believe that he's in danger and he can fear for his life.
Darren, I'm almost hearing from number 7 that you don't find the state's version believable. Is that correct? Okay. I think she wants to withdraw her vote, which is understandable. Now, do remember, though, in the call to police, Darren,
yes,
that George Zimmerman said he's a teenager. So he knew he was a teenager. So he was correct. He said it in the call.
It's a great point.
Number 1.
Number 1. Oh, good. I don't have to run far.
Yes, I say that prosecution in George Zimmerman's story is believable, but that doesn't mean that I would find him innocent at all. I have to hear a lot more information. Something isn't right.
Right.
Something just is not right about this case. So I believe at that moment in his mind, this is what was going on.
So you've got a thirst for some more information before you're rendering a final. Okay, so
And
maybe
that's
not
good. The trial hasn't started yet, number 1, so that's good.
That's right. And we had number 6. That was on your list too, right?
Yes.
Number 6.
Yes, I'm just deeply conflicted about this trial. You know, both sides are believable, but I need more evidence and more facts to come out to make a decision.
So you, like number 1, you've got a thirst for more. Well, good news is that thirst is going to get quenched starting with this trial.
Yeah.
Yes.
We'll be in it. Don't worry. We're going to show you every moment of the trial and understand. So, Kirby, looking at this case, would you rather be the prosecutor or the defense attorney?
Honestly, in this case,
If you wanted to win.
If I wanted to, well, depends on what you want to win. If you
It has nothing to do with how much you get paid, just if you want to win the case.
Well, if you want to win a manslaughter charge, the prosecution's case. If you want to figure out who's going to win a murder charge, the defense table, because this jury has told you, they're split, and tie goes to the defense every time.
How about you, Esther?
I agree. I'd rather be a defendant in this case, representing the defendant in this case, than the state of Florida.
For murder, but how about for manslaughter?
For manslaughter, it's a closer question. I still think there might be problems to get manslaughter beyond a reasonable doubt. It's much closer for manslaughter than murder, though.
All right, Yale Galanter, what would your level of confidence as a defense attorney be in this case, going in 10 being super confident, 0's like, oh my goodness, I'm representing Jodi Arias?
I would say probably 7.5. I think the facts and the law are on the defense's side, Vinny. I think the biggest problem that the defense team has is picking a jury that's going to be fair and impartial, that's not going to have this emotional charge that has circulated around this case. But if the jurors come in and they listen to the evidence and they really do follow the law, it definitely favors the defense here.
All right, Judge Alex, jury selection just around the corner. How big a role will race play in all of this?
Well, I think race plays a very big role in all of this. If you take a look at the self-defense claim, you see the pictures of Zimmerman with a broken nose and with the contusions on the back of his head, the cuts on the back of his head. Now imagine that the victim was a 40-year-old white male. The self-defense claim just jumps out at you. But because it's a young black male, everybody's heart says this should never have happened, and the self-defense claim becomes weaker. So race is a huge factor in this, and that's going to, unfortunately, make it difficult to pick a jury. But as you know, Vinny, I was the judge who tried the case that became the movie Pain and Gain. Everybody in Miami had heard of that case. And I picked the jury in that case. It was hard, but it took me about a month. But I sat a good, solid, fair, and impartial jury in that case. It just takes more effort.
It just takes time. Great job by our in-studio jury and all our guests. Really do appreciate it. Darren Kavanaugh in for Ryan Smith tonight. Great job. We're just getting started with the George Zimmerman case, folks. HLN is the place for all of it, and we'll be doing it right here after dark.